Yeah, so I thought, so this, I suppose, is the more, should we say, procedural side of our research, in the sense that ethics is really important, and I'm sure we all think about it quite a lot in our research, but it's not always the most exciting part, shall we say. So ethical considerations for our research will evolve throughout the project. So everything I say here is based on what we can do throughout the project, but obviously we've spoken a lot in the last, throughout the day, about trying to pick our case studies. So we might also want to think about, as we go throughout the project and we select case studies, it may require further ethical considerations. So there'll be a bit more detail about that as I go through. So as project coordinator, I have the role of, we all have the role of thinking about ethics in our research, but I have the privilege of trying to write it down in terms of deliverables. So we all are from different research backgrounds, we all have different experiences of research, but this presentation is just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I think we all have the same considerations in our research, but I think what's important here is that it's also a requirement for our funding, in the sense that if we're thinking about ethics and Horizon 2020, it has very clear ethical guidelines, and we also have deliverables that have to be met to reach to be in line with our funding guidelines. So although we all think about it day to day, it is really important that we carry out these kind of processes and enact it and demonstrate that we are enacting it for our funding. I wanted to talk about two key principles today, about informed consent and confidentiality, and also finally think about other ethical considerations, because obviously the research that we're doing over contested borders can be very sensitive. So just kind of some considerations that we might want to think about as we go forward. So we're obviously thinking about those people that we're engaging with and the nature of our research, but we also need to think about ourselves as researchers and how we can make sure that we're kind of safe within certain research activities. So yeah, this is based on what I've provided in terms of the ethical deliverables that I've had to write, but also this is an evolving document. So if you've got any feedback or thoughts based on your own research, because you'll know a lot of the different research contexts better than I will, then please let me know and we can think about how to integrate all of that too. Okay, so if you cast your minds back to the training needs survey that we did in May, June time, I asked a couple of questions about training that people had previously received. In terms of research ethics, those people that had received training was about 11 out of about 24, 25 of us. And the other one was around data management, and this was 5 out of 24. So I think the idea around research ethics and data management and thinking about how we can do that, again, is really important, but also it's really important to make sure that we meet certain regulatory guidelines for the funding, and also just for legal purposes as well. So I'm going to be touching on the research ethics side of things, and Alison Nightingale, who's one of our data management, part of our data management team in Bath, is going to touch on data management. So like I said, it's probably not the most exciting part of our research jobs, but it is very important that we think about these things. Okay, so what are ethical issues that we might want to think about? So in terms of Horizon 2020, there is clear guidelines around how we should conduct research. And that's also embedded within the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, because obviously it's European Union money. And the EU is very clear that all research and innovation activities carried out under Horizon 2020 are supposed to comply with ethical principles that are relevant to national, union and international legislation, as well as the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, and European Conventions on Human Rights and its supplementary protocols. So the idea is that we should pay particular attention to what they call proportionality, the right to privacy, the right to protection of personal data, the right to physical and mental integrity of a person, the right to non-discrimination, and the need to ensure high levels of human protection as well. And what they do, as it says in this second paragraph, they highlight this isn't me highlighting it, that research ethics is of crucial importance to all scientific domains, and they specifically say like social sciences need to think about informed consent and confidentiality are important in sociological study as they are for clinical research. So I'll come on to these two principles in a moment, just to give a bit of guidelines about how we're ensuring we're meeting those standards. I thought you might also find this quite interesting. So this, again, is from the Training Needs Survey that was done earlier this year. It might be worth saying that there will be another Training Needs Survey early next year. But as you can see, the majority of our research, well, most of it from here is qualitative. I think there was only one person that said that they did quantitative research. So we need to think about, especially when we're looking at interviews and also surveys, we need to think about how we're kind of engaging with people. And like I said, when we do think about other case studies going forward, we might need to think about other ethical considerations. So I've based this around the need to do interviews and surveys, which I think will come across quite regularly throughout the rest of the project. But also there are other things that we might need to think about. So for example, if you're trying to interview under 18s, there are certain guidelines towards that. And also if you're interviewing vulnerable people, so refugees, there are different guidelines around that too. And I think this might be a good thing to come back to in the next Training Needs Survey, and then in the next summer school, which will be September 2020, think about how we can offer training based on these different issues. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a run-through of the process. So David had the pleasure, in terms of the application phase, to think about the ethics and how that actually fits within the project. So the EU take it very seriously from the outset, that you've actually thought about the ethics and how it fits within your methodology and your research objectives and the potential impact of the research. So, for example, the stigmatization of certain groups, political retaliation, and how the data will be used. So that was just at the application phase. And then since we've been awarded the funding, the ethics is actually a key deliverable of the project that Bath has responsibility for. So we've had to, had this as a tick box that we've had to complete and meet the ethical requirements. And that has gone through the ethics committee at the University of Bath. It's also important to note that there is an ongoing process here. So during the project, when we have management meetings with each institutional league, ethics will be a part of that as well. We'll have to discuss. And also the EU can request information and audit us as the project goes through. So we need to make sure we're compliant. And just at the bottom of here, even after completion, there is a possibility that we get audited up to 2 years after the project to make sure that we've followed certain guidelines. So yeah, it goes throughout the lifetime of the project and continues after. So just to give you a bit of an idea about what the EU thinks of and Horizon 2020, and I think you'll find this being very similar with most funding bodies in terms of what they consider important ethical issues. And here, as a researcher, you're therefore encouraged to engage in a continued reflection on any new ethical concerns that emerge while performing your work and on their potential implications for your own work. So your research participants, communities, and society in general. So again, I think these are aspects on this list. I'm not going to go through them all individually, but I think they're all aspects that we will think about within our research, but we just have to make sure that we are proving that we're doing it, particularly around the first highlighted point, which is free and informed consent, and the second highlighted one, which is ensuring privacy and confidentiality. So I just wanted to provide a bit more detail in terms of the process that we should be following to demonstrate these two principles. So the first one is around informed consent. UK institutions, I'm aware that this is drilled into us quite a lot. Even within our students doing dissertations, we tell them that they need informed consent. But I'm not sure how much that kind of buzzword goes across different disciplines or different areas. So just to outline what it actually means is basically that you're making sure that human participants within your research enter it freely with all the information about what it means to be involved in that research, and that they give their consent before they enter it. How are we going to do that, I suppose, is a good question. And it seemed that to demonstrate that you've got informed consent has two different stages. That first stage is around providing the information. So basically, how do you give participants the relevant information? How do they have time to look through it all? And how do you know that they've asked enough questions to do that? So, as prepared earlier, we have this information sheet that is available. So this has gone through the University of Bath Ethics Committee and has been approved. So we have quite strict templates of what we're meant to do when we provide information. So this follows that template, which is around all these different questions and answers. So this is available on the internal area of the DisTerrMem website that Shauna pointed out earlier. So you can have a look through in your own time as well. It provides information on the project. It also outlines what it requires if participants are involved in the project. It's also got a bit about data management, so where data will be stored. I think what's crucial at the moment, and Alison's going to go through this in a bit more detail in a moment, that to meet data management requirements, a lot of the data that we do collect will have to be anonymized, which I think in most cases are fine. We might want to have a discussion about what we do in terms of elite interviewing, because you might want to name people. But at this stage, we do have to anonymize all the data. So that means in terms of withdrawing data, we have to make it really clear at this point that people can stop the interview or stop the survey during it, but once they're anonymized, they can't withdraw the data. So this is just to make sure that we're compliant with data regulations. And also what we need to think of, this information form is currently in English, but we need to think about, obviously, we're going to be doing a lot more research in lots of different places. So this will have to be translated when we do different research and different case studies. Okay, so the second part of informed consent naturally requires a second form, and the researcher reiterates the terms of the research, but also gives explicit points that people give their consent to. So as you can see here, this gives a bit of an outline of the research that is about to be conducted. And at this point, there's highlighted areas where you can say it's an interview or it's a survey, also how long it's going to be, and how it's going to be recorded. But this is the point where there are explicit boxes where people are providing their consent and know what they are getting involved with by being engaged in the research, for example. So there's different bullet points and also a signature. And again, this is a template that's provided to make sure that we are compliant with certain things, which is why it's shaped in the way it is and has been approved by the Ethics Committee. So we do have to make sure that we are following these guidelines. Again, it just kind of reiterates the importance of data and data protection, particularly around the anonymization of it and the fact people can't withdraw their data at a later time. And again, this will have to be translated when we look at different contexts and different case studies. Okay, the second important principle that I wanted to touch on is this idea of confidentiality. And like I said, with a research topic that could be potentially very contentious and very sensitive, it's really important to think about confidentiality and the impact that the research might have on those being researched. Because obviously there's problems around data breaches, but also we need to think about safety and security also. We do have a data management plan, and again, this is a deliverable that's a really important part of our funding. So we have to have a data management plan to make sure we're compliant with data regulations. And a bit like the ethics document, this is a living document. So as our research progresses, it's expected that we'll add to the data management plan too. This is also available on our internal website, and Alison's going to be talking about it a lot more in a moment. So yeah, the data management plan, it does include the handling of data during and after the project. So it carries through this kind of life cycle of data collection. So how are we going to collect it? Where will it be stored? And what do we do with it at the end of the project? So at the end of the project, we are expected to archive our data. And it's been suggested that the best place to put this is through the UK Data Service. So again, for them to accept the data that we give them, it has to be in certain formats, and they're very specific on that. Yeah, so the data management plan also goes into like our methodology and to make sure that we're meeting certain standards. And also how will it be shared? And it's quite clear that the easiest thing to do, and I'll provide more detail of this as we start collecting data, is to actually collect it and store it in the University of Bath. We have something called an X Drive, which is an open access. Well, it's not open access, it's private, but we can give other researchers from different institutions access to it. So that's seen as the safest way to kind of ensure confidentiality and make sure we're compliant with data regulations. Okay, so just to sum up, really, again, like, we all apply ethical considerations, even if we're filling a form out or not, to our research. And I think it's really important that we think about the nature of our research and where we do this. So this is quite a useful resource. This was also an Horizon 2020 project that looks at doing kind of global research and ethical considerations that we should all take in as we do this research. And I think a lot of it is around local relevance and having, including local communities to make sure it's relevant, to make sure we feedback the findings, have cultural sensitivities, etc. And I think because we do have a lot of project partners across all the different institutions and all the different case studies, I think we're in a really good place to kind of think about all these things. But I think it's important to kind of just set out at the beginning that we are thinking about the nature of the research and how we engage with the research, with the case studies and the people that we're engaging with also. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it there. There's probably there's quite a lot of links that you might want to read. So around code of conduct, and there's also a link to that I just mentioned at the bottom of this kind of webpage. So feel free to read, in time as well.